Things are going from bad to worse for Boris Johnson, as well they should, you might say. Aides are quitting, his backbenchers are revolting, and they're also thinking of voting against him. And the terms of the investigation into what was once a single party held at number 10 against coronavirus restrictions last Christmas, is expanding. As we can see here from the Telegraph, this is the announcement that in fact there's not one party, but as Dominic Cummings has suggested previously, several parties now being investigated by the Cabinet Secretary to assess whether any wrongdoing was committed. Here is the Cabinet Secretary announcing to the House of Commons earlier today.
Now, I can confirm to the House that the Cabinet Secretary's investigation will establish the facts surrounding the following. Allegations made of a gathering at number 10 Downing Street on the 27th of November 2020, a gathering at the Department for Education on the 10th of December 2020, and allegations made of a gathering at number 10 Downing Street on the 18th of December 2020. Now, the primary purpose of the Cabinet Secretary's investigation will be to establish swiftly a general understanding of the nature of the gatherings, including attendance, the setting and the purpose, and with reference to adherence to the guidance in place at the time. Now, if required, the investigation will establish whether individual disciplinary action is warranted.
So Labour and Breeze, of course, heckling at his repeated use of the word gathering. This has been an attempt by the Conservative Party elsewhere to acknowledge effectively that yes, people were gathering in place, but as it was not a party, it was not in contravention of coronavirus restrictions. But the Cabinet Secretary's investigation is designed to determine the actual purpose of these quote-unquote gatherings. It may be the case that after said investigation, the word gathering can legitimately and objectively, without any doubt or hesitation, be called a party thereafter, in which case it would have broken coronavirus legislation and guidance, and everyone there will have broken the government's own law. So, again, I have to keep saying that this is the reason this story should not go away. I don't think it will go away as quickly as some other allegations against Boris Johnson have done, because we have to say again that we've been living under the government's coronavirus guidance for the better part of 2 years, and it was particularly strict around Christmas last year, to the extent that we were told by government that it was against the law for us to go to see our families, our friends, and our loved ones and celebrate Christmas with them. This is an unprecedented interference in the private lives of individual people in this country. By and large, people accepted it. I don't think they should. I didn't. But by and large, people accepted it. So it's rubbing a lot of people up the wrong way to learn not only that there was a Christmas party, alleged Christmas party, at Downing Street, that is in the Prime Minister's private residence, but also 2 more parties, at one of which he is alleged to have attended. And that when they were rumbled about this, or just before, when the questions were first started being asked, they were laughing about it privately. So the question has to be asked, why? Why is it that we continue to take anything the government says about coronavirus seriously, given that they don't take it seriously amongst themselves? How do they have any authority to pretend to govern the country in respect to the virus, with respect to the virus, anymore? Boris Johnson, the day after the first story broke, came out and announced new restrictions. How can he possibly do this? How can anyone take him seriously? How can he expect anyone to take him seriously? Given what has now come out, why should we have to live under laws that our political leaders do not follow themselves? This is just flagrant it might be, but flagrant it certainly is. Abuse of power, flagrant hypocrisy. And again, the stakes are so incredibly high. This is not another, he paid too much to the wrong guy to have Downing Street redecorated. That minor little Westminster Trivial Pursuit question, which the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, obsessed over for far too long, given that it was a story that nobody realistically cared about. This is very different to that. And you can see that by the reaction, by the way that the story has taken on much more significance, by the way the public are paying much more attention to it, and by the fact that the costs to the Prime Minister personally and to the Conservative government generally are beginning to stack up. So as the Telegraph here reports, already 2 more of Boris Johnson's aides are under pressure. He's already lost one, Allegra Stratton, the person who was supposedly hired to become Downing Street's new press spokesperson. resigned for laughing about the flagrant abuse of the law, breaking of the law. As we've said in the previous video, she is by far the least important person in this story. It shouldn't begin and end with her. She was effectively running through the line she was being given, learning how to lie about it, which is, of course, the job of a press secretary. But it's coming for higher-up people. So as the Telegraph reports, as I say, 2 more Boris Johnson aides are under pressure. Jack Doyle, who's Mr. Johnson's Director of Communications, is understood to have handed awards to staff at the event on December the 18th, which was attended by up to 50 people, and he was at that time Deputy Communications Chief, and he also gave a speech thanking members of his team for their efforts. However, sources familiar with the situation told ITV News that senior figures regularly thanked staff at the end of the week and said such events were commonplace, which isn't an excuse if it breaks coronavirus law. It's just an example of even more breaking of coronavirus law by the government, which sets those laws. On Thursday night, the Telegraph continued. Downing Street continued to maintain that the event was not a party and that no COVID rules had been broken. It came as a special advisor who put Allegra Stratton on the spot at a rehearsal was under pressure to quit as well after sources insisted he had attended the event. This man's name is Ed Oldfield. He's heard asking Miss Stratton in the video footage whether she had seen reports on Twitter that there was a Downing Street Christmas party, and she was laughing nervously. And she responds, "I went home." They ran through a number of other formulations. It was mockingly suggested that it was a cheese and wine event, not a party, therefore it was all right. All manner of different things. She quite clearly didn't know, I think, what the situation was. Her job is to lie about it, but she not being in full possession of the facts, or at least not fully aware of what the guidance or the law was at that time. That's why she was stumbling. That's why she was asking questions. She said she didn't know if it, if the gathering constituted a breach of social distancing, for instance, whether it would be acceptable for it to be a gathering with cheese and wine as opposed to a party. All of these different things. But she's been the sacrificial lamb. She has been scapegoated, thoroughly scapegoated. See the picture of her here. It is a video which we've already played of her being very, very tearfully announcing her resignation. But the disclosure of the Telegraph continued prompted calls from Mr. Oldfield, who is 24 and the son of a Conservative Party donor, to resign amid growing concern that Miss Stratton had been scapegoated, which she was. Also, everything about this is just wrong. There is unless Mr. Oldfield is supremely talented, and judging by his behaviour in the leaked video and his witless comments, I would suggest the answer to that is no. But unless he is supremely talented, he has no business being a high-ranking member of the Conservative Party's inner circle. He has no business being an advisor to Boris Johnson, except for the fact that he's the son of a Tory Party donor. Unfortunately, Labour shot their gun far too quickly earlier in the year, trying to go after Tory sleaze, when actually the example of sleaze was questionable, and it was difficult and complicated, and it wasn't going to get much public traction. This is Tory sleaze. This is proper Tory sleaze. And it's another aspect of the story. Every layer of the story is coated in slime. So not only have they broken the law, but it also turns out that one of the people involved in breaking the law is basically only there because he's the son of a party donor. And he's given a high-ranking, probably quite highly paid position advising Boris Johnson at the age of 24. Maybe that explains why Boris Johnson's government has so far been utterly, utterly shit, because that's the calibre of people he's got advising him. But a former cabinet minister said, this is the Telegraph continuing to report, "I've looked at the video. This is Allegra Stratton, appeared in the video to be bewildered. She's been made into a fool guy here. I think those asking her the question should be resigning." True, because while she was likely not at the party, they very likely were. She is clearly less culpable, but if those people were there, they clearly should go. All true. Andrew Mitchell's another former cabinet minister. He said, "I don't like the way Allegra was treated and obliged to come out onto her doorstep in tears, etc." Yep, that's all fine. We've made that point previously in the video, that the party even considered that was an acceptable response. That she can be made the face of all this, given how deep the wrongdoing goes, how far the termites have dug, how well dined they are, is a nonsense. Again, bad advice for Boris Johnson from another probably teenaged advisor of Boris Johnson, who's drawn the progeny, the spawn of another wealthy Tory party donor. Well-placed source said on Thursday, this is Rough Justice, this is all about Allegra Stratton. Allegra popped into the event for a few minutes before going home. So she was there, even if only for a few minutes, just as she said in the rehearsal video, but Eb was at the party, along with a lot of other people in that room. Mr. Oldfield did not respond to regards to a comment on Thursday. Pursued down the street by a Sky News reporter, he to comment when asked repeatedly, "Are you planning to resign?" I think that means he refused to comment when asked repeatedly if he's planning to resign. No, he shouldn't resign. He should be sacked. That would show some kind of leadership, not blaming Allegra Stratton, and not saying that, as Boris Johnson attempted to do, he would investigate the wrongdoing and then blame his party apparatchiks for it, his lower-ranking MPs, for instance, or his backbenchers, or any cabinet ministers who are attending. No, go around sacking people, sack your advisors, sack these spineless, witless teenagers that you've got around who are only there because their daddies have a lot of money. Sack them. That's a good start. Then resign yourself. That would be a better start. Friends of Miss Stratton told the Telegraph she feels betrayed and deeply hurt, as well she should. The Telegraph understands video was sent to Nathan Lee, who had been a producer when she was UK editor of ITV News. The government on Thursday announced that Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, would expand his investigation, as the video we've already played suggests, into claims that 3 parties took place last year when London was under strict COVID restrictions. Michael Ellis, the Cabinet Office Minister, said Mr. Case would also investigate allegations of a leaving do in Number 10, which again is the Prime Minister's official residence, on November 27th, and a gathering at the Department for Education on December the 10th. It comes after the Telegraph revealed that Lord Lister, the former Number 10 Chief of Staff, had allegedly joined the Prime Minister at the leaving do in November when the country was in its second lockdown. So we can now answer the question, or we can at least begin to answer the question as to whether Boris himself is culpable for anything other than dire party management, because that was always the case, even if he hadn't been at any of these parties, despite them being in his private residence. Even if he hadn't been at the parties, the fact is he's presided over an absolute catastrophe, a complete shit show. And that's almost rising to the level of resignation quality shit show anyway. But now it's at least believable, it's credibly asserted that he was there. And that's something else entirely, because that involves him directly in the flagrant is the word I'm looking for there, breaking of the laws he's forced us all to live under. That's bad stuff. Insiders present have confirmed, the Telegraph continues, that Mr. Johnson gave a speech at the event, attended by approximately 30 press officers and aides. The initial inquiry had been focused solely on the alleged Christmas party at Number 10 on December the 18th, which was prompting claims that Mr. Johnson was seeking to exclude other events in which he allegedly participated. Mr. Ellis told MPs on Thursday, the Telegraph reports, the primary purpose of the Cabinet Secretary's investigation will be to swiftly establish a general understanding of the nature of the gatherings, including attendance, setting and the purpose, with reference to adherence to the guidance in place at the time. It may, if need be, establish whether individual disciplinary action is warranted. He noted that ministers, special advisors and civil servants will be expected to cooperate with this investigation. In the terms of reference, it emerged that he would have scope to expand his inquiry should credible allegations relating to other gatherings come to light, which, well, given we've got 3 already, is it likely that it's just those 3? It's gone from 1 to 3 in the space of a day. I think it's probably quite likely that we can expect to see more. There are suggestions as many as 7 gatherings took place, the Telegraph continues, in Westminster between November and December, which were all in breach of COVID restrictions. Meanwhile, the Times has disclosed that on December the 14th, advisors at the Conservative Party headquarters held a party with Sean Bailey, who was at that time a Conservative candidate for the Mayor of London, at which more than 24 aides and volunteers were said to have been present, and it was allegedly a raucous bash, which resulted in damage to a door. Did they bash it too hard? Just after a day after Boris Johnson told the public that Christmas parties could go ahead, Downing Street confirmed it would not hold a Christmas party. It's opposite land. They held a Christmas party when they told us not to, and now they've told us that we can. They're not holding one. It's such inept image management. How are they so dumb? How have we got to this point when a child could do a better job of managing the media than actual highly paid press officers could? How have we got to this point? But if we move on, so the 2 aides are not the only ones under pressure. One of them is another person is in fact thinking of doing the honourable thing and resigning, which is Boris Johnson's standards advisor. It will come as news to anybody, I think, who's ever watched Boris Johnson, that he's ever had anybody advising him on ethics and standards. And Lord Gate, I think that's how it's pronounced, is the man with this exceptionally difficult job, who's either been doing his best, but because of the sheer contemptible, loathsome, backstabbing of Boris Johnson, has not been able to make any headway, or he's just been incompetent and has been letting Boris Johnson get away with much of it anyway. But anyway, this is the Telegraph here reports, separate article by the Telegraph's Harry York and Gordon Rayner. Boris Johnson's standards advisor was on the brink of quitting on Thursday night following accusations the Prime Minister misled him over the refurbishment of his Downing Street flat. So this is a separate story. This is the one that Keir Starmer has attempted to play for much, much more than it was worth a few months ago now, quite a few months ago. I think the allegation is essentially that Carrie Johnson, Boris Johnson's spouse now, wanted Number 10 refurbished, and there wasn't enough money for it, so they tapped Conservative Party donors to do it, but they didn't necessarily declare it. Boris Johnson, I think, claimed that it was not funded by donors, or it was funded in the normal way. It transpires that this might not have been the case, and he didn't inform his standards advisor of the fact. The Telegraph understands that Lord Gate, whatever, will consider his position if Mr. Johnson does not satisfactorily explain why he did not share vital evidence with him when he investigated the affair earlier this year. This also smacks of somebody trying to cover their own back, it has to be said. But nevertheless, on Thursday, the Electoral Commission fined the Conservative Party £17,800 for breaking rules on reporting donations after its own investigation, which included the missing evidence, found Mr. Johnson had in fact asked a Tory donor to fund the makeover. The potential resignation of Lord Gate would put Mr. Johnson's leadership under even greater pressure. The Telegraph reports the latest blow to his authority on a day when he welcomed the birth of his second child with his wife Carrie meant he is battling three separate controversies: his flat, new COVID restrictions, and the Christmas parties held in Number 10 last year. The Cabinet Secretary's investigations into the parties was broadened, as we've already said. Following the resignation of Mr. Johnson's former spokesperson, Allegra Stratton, on Wednesday, two more aides dragged into the row. That's Jack Doyle and the child, Ed Oldfield, who was... He's not even just an advisor, he's Downing Street's head of broadcast. How? He's 12 years old. The only qualification he seems to have is that his father is very rich. Tory sleaze. Tory. I'm the furthest thing from a Labour voter you can imagine. I used to be on the left. I haven't been on the left for very many years. I find the whole thing contemptible. But this accusation finally is now sticking, because now this is the time to make it. If only they hadn't blown their guns, as the saying goes, when the issue was a minor one. This would have been an even more effective attack line. Anyway, Tory rebellion over the new COVID Plan B rules announced on Wednesday is also gathering place. More than 30 backbenchers are indicating they would rebel when the rules are put to a vote in Parliament next week. The new rules, they are not full lockdown, but they are still incomprehensibly stupid. So there are all kinds of rules. You can go to the pub, but if you're going to, and you don't have to wear a face mask there. I'm trying to remember these now because it's just ridiculous. You have to wear a mask in church, I think, unless you're singing, because there is, or in a choir, because there is an exception, across the board exception for singing. You don't have to wear a mask if you're singing, which prompted one journalist to ask, well, okay, does that mean if I walk down the street or into a shop while singing, I'm also exempt from wearing the mask? And the government's response was effectively yes. So if you don't want to wear a mask, either be exempt or sing. He's also toying with the idea of introducing some kind of vaccine passport, which is to say making the National Health Service's coronavirus passport type thing, which they give you, mandatory in order to access certain venues or certain events, especially with large numbers of people present, despite the fact that the government's own studies and the Scottish government's own studies have shown that even a full vaccine mandate program, a full vaccine passport, program, enacted across the board, would have no appreciable impact. There's no evidence that this works. Of course, if you start going into that, there are questions about whether masks do very much good as well. But nevertheless, it certainly is the case that the Conservative government and the Scottish government's studies show that there is no appreciable effect of vaccine passports, but he's trying to introduce one. This is annoying Conservative Party backbenchers, but also they are emboldened by the fact that the government has already flouted its own restrictions so many times, so seriously. So enough Conservative MPs, I think, are appreciating the public anger over this to say, well, the government now has no moral authority whatsoever, and so we can't really be held responsible for breaking the party line and voting against it, because we're much more in tune with the country than our leadership is. And if that's what they're saying, they're right. But if we move on, so Keir Starmer, I know this is the same story again, so there's an investigation which is into the Prime Minister, particularly the event that the Prime Minister is said to have attended. Keir Starmer's called for Boris Johnson, or he's actually called on Conservative MPs to oust Boris Johnson. He says a string of rows centred on Downing Street in recent months show the Prime Minister is unfit for office, which is, I think, fair. I think that's a fair point from Keir Starmer. It's a shame he's the one making it, because he doesn't make it very well, because he's useless at this kind of thing. But no, Conservative MPs should do this. The problem, as we'll shortly come on to, is that there is literally no one to replace him, and that includes Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer arguably makes it much less likely that there will be a significant Conservative Party rebellion or revolt if he's publicly calling on them to do so, which is again a tactical error, the old rule being never interrupt your enemies when they're making a mistake. Keir Starmer makes it much less likely. If a Conservative MP is thinking about voting against the government, and Keir Starmer comes out and says Conservative MPs should oust Boris Johnson, well then backbench Conservative MPs who don't like Boris Johnson and know the public doesn't like Boris Johnson, but are nevertheless devoted to the Conservative Party and support Conservative-leaning areas, cannot be seen to be backing the call of the leader of the opposition of the Labour Party to oust their leader. So actually, I suspect, to the extent this muttering from Keir Starmer has any effect at all, it will be counterproductive. It will limit the rebellion, and so make Boris Johnson's job easier. That would be my prediction for the way this unfolds. But speaking to the Telegraph, because it's unusual to say that the Labour Party is more competent than the Conservatives at anything very much, except at incompetence. But he's clearly seen a gap here. If the Labour leader is speaking to the Telegraph, then he is pretty sure that there is a large part of the Telegraph reading base, which is by and large soft right, it's by and large Conservative leaning, if not Conservative voting. He sees significant disaffection, sufficient disaffection, that is to say, such that if he makes an overture to them, they might in fact come over onto his side. And there has been polling out recently which shows that Labour Party has finally at long last taken the lead on the back of all of these various scandals. I think it's the Savanta Comrades poll and one other poll showing that the Labour Party are now up to 40%, the Conservatives have dropped to 36%. But this is not very good news for the Labour Party because it means their entire popularity is based on doing nothing. And in fact, they've backed Boris Johnson's new coronavirus measures and only objected to them in the sense that they don't go far enough, Labour's constant line. But if the Labour Party overtakes the Conservative Party, not because of what it does well, but because of what the Conservative Party does badly, this doesn't really speak well of the Labour Party, it's just the only alternative in the room. And it, of course, means if the Conservative Party ever does get its act together again, that will change. And it is still early days. But anyway, speaking to the Telegraph, Labour leader Keir Starmer claimed the string of rows centred on Downing Street in recent months showed Mr Johnson was unfit for office. He urged Tory MPs to consider what the coming years before the next general election would be like under the current leadership and said they have to decide, are we going to endure this for the next 2 years or however long it may be, degrading ourselves and our party, defending the indefensible. This is the man who sat next to Jeremy Corbyn and campaigned for him to become leader of the country. So again, didn't raise any objections either to at the time, whilst he was in the shadow cabinet, to any of the multitude of scandals that occurred under Jeremy Corbyn's watch. So again, he's not the best place to make this claim. Nevertheless, he's right, but he's the wrong person to be being right. The intervention is an apparent attempt, as we've said, to fuel the rebellion, sweeping the Tory backbenches after Mr Johnson announced his new COVID restrictions on Wednesday, though, as I've said, I think that makes it less likely to happen. It is likely to be dismissed as political opportunism by the Prime Minister's supporters. Any attack on his suitability for office in the past has been firmly rejected by Downing Street. There are other reasons Keir Starmer isn't necessarily the best person to be making these claims, not least because he's also allegedly broken social distancing guidelines and coronavirus guidance. This is back in May this year. There's some reports that the Labour Party had to dismiss an election booze row after Sir Keir Starmer enjoyed a beer after a day on the campaign trail. He was seen mixing with party workers in a constituency office in Durham on Friday night. Rules state that you can gather indoors for work, but this doesn't include social gatherings with colleagues, which again makes the fate of those three parties somewhat more determined, I would suggest. Tory co-chair Amanda Milling said Keir Starmer has continually and rightly called for the people to follow the rules designed to keep us safe, if only her own party had been doing that. But it's now in question whether he is following them himself. People will rightly be asking questions about this. Labour Party attempted to dismiss it, but again, it's not a good look. Not a good look at all. And the problem is they are all at it. They are all at it. The Labour Party is by no means free of the taint of this blatant hypocrisy. There's a few different ones from Guido Fawkes. There's Kevin Jones. This was back in 2020 in May. Labour Marshal and their footage from before Boris announced the loosening of lockdown shows Durham MP Kevin Jones breaking the rules along with some police officers to attend a VE-themed birthday party for a 100-year-old constituent, which is a really nice thing to do and it should absolutely be allowed to go ahead. The point is he broke the rules because it wasn't. So it's exactly the same thing. I think these rules should be done away with. Especially now, given that we know that the government doesn't take them seriously, despite telling us that we have to. But they are the rules, and if the party telling the Conservative Party that they should be out because they've broken the rules is also breaking the rules, not a good look. He's not the only one. This is the entirety of Kensington Labour, apparently, again from Guido Fawkes. This was November the 7th last year, when the rules were very strict, it must be said, must be remembered. Labour's Kensington branch was out in force campaigning for Sadiq Khan's re-election at that time, which was in contravention of the national lockdown's ban on non-essential travel. They were also clearly ignoring social distancing, he said. And the Independent has a little summary. These are not exclusively Labour figures, but it just shows that everyone does it. So, not least Professor Neil Ferguson, of course, famously went off to bang a woman who was not his wife, shall we say. The architect of lockdown, breaking lockdown for sex, fair enough. But as you know, the Independent Scottish National Party MP was the latest at the time this article was published to breach this. Margaret Ferrier, she was fantastic. She had coronavirus. She travelled all the way down to Westminster. She knew she had coronavirus. Then she went travelling up to Scotland again. Then she went, I think, around some kind of market or shopping centre, and just wandering like a clown across a minefield, just spreading the virus everywhere. The SNP is at it then. Who else have we got? Jeremy Corbyn, obviously. He breached the rule of 6. He attended a dinner with 8 other people, which is breaking one of the tight restrictions in place during the COVID-19 pandemic. New laws prohibiting social gatherings of more than 6 people came into effect on the 14th of September, etc. The newspaper, which claimed the dinner party took place on the 26th of September, said Mr. Corbyn had apologised. Stanley Johnson, the Prime Minister's father, did it. Who else have we got? Dominic Cummings, famously with his trip to Barnard Castle. Neil Ferguson, as we've said. Dr. Catherine Calderwood, who was Scotland's chief medical officer. She resigned in April after twice breaking lockdown restrictions in order to visit her second home, located more than an hour away from her main residence in Edinburgh. And Nicola Sturgeon defended her, of course. As the Independent here reports, she backed Dr. Calderwood to remain in her position. She ultimately decided to relinquish her role, however, Calderwood that is, which Nicola Sturgeon would, but Calderwood relinquished her role so as not to be a distraction from the government's social distancing message. But again, that's breaking the law endorsed by the Scottish National Party, who wanted it to remain in place. More Conservative Party people did it. Then Housing, Communities and Local Government Secretary Robert Jenrick. He was criticised for travelling 150 miles from his London property to his Hertfordshire home, where he travelled to his parents' home in Shropshire. Stephen Kinnock, the Labour MP, did it. He attended his parents' birthday party, 78th birthday party. It just goes on. Carl, that's not a politician, that's a footballer. I don't know why they've included it, but it's the Independent. And yeah, this is a full fact article which lists a few more. Obviously, we've had Stephen Kinnock, Labour MP Tahir Ali, Labour MP Kevin Jones, Welsh Labour Health Minister Vaughan Gething. Just all over the place. They all do it. This is a general political problem. It's condensed and it's concentrated in the form of the Conservative Party, but it's a general problem with the political class. They are so far removed from ordinary human beings. They are happy to vote for measures which we have to live under, which they will happily flout. The Labour Party wants more and stricter of these, and as we've seen, a whole litany of their own MPs have been breaking for the laws they thought should go further and be tighter and be more quick. So, who the hell do we... We are screwed as a country. So The Guardian here reports that Tory MPs are beginning to ask if Boris Johnson is still a winner. Given the polling situation, it would seem not. He's not particularly popular in his own party. He was always a bit of an outsider in the party, largely because he came from outside of the party. But he was also an undeniable winner. Obviously, he was Mayor of London twice in a heavily Labour city. That was a remarkable achievement. He was in a large part responsible for the Brexit campaign winning. He won the general election, the first one he took, the first one in which he was in charge of the party. So they were prepared to sort of stomach all of his many, many flaws, solely because he kept putting them in power. But now that it seems under threat, will more of them start to jump ship? This is The Guardian's Jessica Elgod saying that after the 2019 election, he was widely held as an electoral genius, although Dominic Cummings would have it that the strategy, not the man, won it. None of those factors ever really changed the doubts that many Conservative MPs had about Johnson. They support him because he's a winner, only while he is. There have been many moments in the pandemic that caused widespread discontent. However, school meals with Marcus Rashford, the algorithm that ruined exam results, the cancellation of Christmas. But Johnson kept his party high in the polls, oversaw a successful vaccine rollout and won crucial by-elections such as Hartlepool and Old Bexley and Sidcup. However, things have been getting significantly worse. The embarrassment of the number 10 Christmas party and the move to Plan B within hours, seen by many as a diversionary tactic, has turned grumblings to fury. She continues, it's not only sleaze. After the past few months, Johnson has managed to enrage almost every wing of his party. Tax rises upset the Shire Tories, penalising poorer northern homeowners for social care upset MPs in the Red Wall. There have been rebellions on universal credit. Internationalists didn't like the chaos of the Afghanistan withdrawal. That's the only one for which he can't be blamed, given that it was Joe Biden's decision, and he didn't tell anyone in advance, so yeah. Widespread mutiny from libertarians over the move to a Plan B and COVID passports, also higher taxes generally. He could be left relying on Labour votes to push through the new measures. For that to happen, the scale of the revolt would have to be significant, obviously. He has an 80-seat majority. That would be a big revolt if it got that far. But as we've seen, there are already 30 prepared to. 30 have publicly said that they will vote against him. It could likely get more, especially if the cabinet secretary's investigation turns up yet more just shit on the part of Boris Johnson. Is he ultimately still a winner, she asks. One of the most immediate tests is the North Shropshire by-election next week. That will be interesting. The Liberal Democrats believe they have a strong chance of taking the seat. Labour has also begun to campaign more in earnest. Local activists there are affronted by suggestions they should keep quiet in favour of the Lib Dems. That's probably the only reason Boris Johnson could win it, is because no one opposed to him can put aside their weird obsession with moral purity and tribal loyalty and work together. The Progressive Alliance is the most talked about thing on the left. It's also the most impossible thing to happen, because most people on the left are moral narcissists and solipsists, and minor deviations from Kant mean that the person deviating cannot be tolerated, which is why the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party, despite only really disagreeing to the extent they want to out-left each other, won't work together. So they could split the vote. That could mean Boris Johnson keeps it. But that will be an election to watch, just because it will show the scale in the public's imagination of outrage and disgust at the revelations that have come out. I hope it's significant. We will have to wait and see for that. But if he loses that, what happens? Is he going to go? Is Boris Johnson going to go? If our Conservative Party MP is going to get rid of him if he stops winning elections, the only reason they like him in the first place. Some people apparently think that this is a possibility, if not a likelihood. As the Telegraph here reports, leadership challenges are beginning to stir as Boris Johnson faces his biggest rebellion yet. A former cabinet minister expects a record number of Tories to reject new COVID restrictions, for instance, and challenges are on manoeuvres. But if the Telegraph goes through and lists these people, you'll see one of the many problems we have, and that we've explained in a different video. There isn't really anyone any better. There is no serious talent in the Conservative Party. There's less in the Labour Party. But Boris Johnson is where he is, not because he is especially good, but because everyone else around him is crap. And that's why we're in this mess. We have no opposition, either across the House of Commons or really from within the Prime Minister's own party. To the extent we've had any opposition to coronavirus legislation, it's come from within the Conservative Party. They're the only ones, that group of 30 or so, who've ever questioned whether the rules are right. The official opposition line is that they are too light. In other words, yes, that, but more. There is no meaningful opposition, in other words. But as the Telegraph reports here, wider questions about Mr. Johnson's leadership have begun to arise during a week of turmoil for Number 10. In recent days, 2 Tory MPs representing Red Wall seats told a meeting of colleagues they were thinking of sending letters of no confidence in the Prime Minister to Sir Graham Brady, the 1922 committee chairman. That's how you oust your own party leader in the Conservative Party. The 1922 committee effectively decides these things. Something like, I don't remember the exact figure. I think it's not as high as 40%. It's basically, if a significant chunk of the Conservative Party MPs send letters of no confidence to the chairman of the 1922 committee, then there will be a vote held for all Conservative MPs on whether the party at large has confidence in the Prime Minister. If he loses that, obviously, then he's out. This happened against Theresa May, for instance. If he wins it, as she did, you cannot then challenge him again for a significant period of time, which makes timing kind of difficult. Now, timing this kind of thing is what you would expect a competent king across the water to do. If there was somebody in the Conservative Party beneath Boris Johnson who had a mind to challenge him, and who was a skilled political operator, intelligent, who had an understanding of party machinery, who was generally speaking competent, if there were one of those people, they would currently be marshalling and strategizing and working this out, coordinating it with the backbenchers to make sure that it doesn't end up as a busted flush. But is there any such person? I'm struggling to think of anyone. I think the Telegraph might come on to list a few. If they don't, we can. The biggest backbench revolt Mr. Johnson suffered since his arrival in Downing Street came last December. That was when 54 Tory MPs voted against the tiered system of COVID restrictions. However, the prospect of a bigger revolt looms, with rebels joined by Conservative MPs who have previously supported the government's COVID policy. Mark Harper, chairman of the COVID recovery group of Tory lockdown skeptics, told the Telegraph, quite clearly, there's a large amount of disquiet on the backbenches, and among people who haven't previously been unhappy. There was definitely an increase in the number of Conservatives concerned about the issue, he added. It's understood membership of the COVID recovery group has grown in the past 24 hours as Tories asking to be added to its WhatsApp group. These people are cowards, by the way. They are carpetbagging their way onto a position which they did not have the confidence to announce publicly when it might have mattered. But nevertheless, I suppose better late than never. unless the thing is typhoid, in which case never is better. Steve Baker, the deputy chairman of the COVID recovery group, urged his colleagues to rebel and said it was vital that the maximum number of Conservative MPs vote against Plan B, whatever our useless opposition do. Labour has already indicated it will support the new rules, so they're unlikely to pass, because you could have the majority of the Conservative Party rebel, and the Labour Party would still back them. So, again, that's the weird political place we're currently in. But he warned there will be a lot of Conservative backbenchers in the no lobby. It would not surprise me if we started to see some of the payroll peeling off. There are MPs on the payroll, incidentally, and MPs who are not. And the payroll is traditionally more loyal to the Prime Minister because they rely on him for extra money. But if the payroll does start peeling off, that means he's really lost the confidence of some very, very key and important people. If they do, it will be over the vaccine passports, Steve Baker suggested. He also raised the prospect of mass resignations amongst the ranks of junior ministers and parliamentary aides. As we've said, Johnson has announced the plan for all nightclubs and unseated indoor venues with a capacity of 500 people or more to require COVID passports. Not popular. Tory MP Simon Jupp described COVID passports as divisive and discriminatory and wrote on social media they do not stop the spread of COVID. Ben Bradley, Red Wall MP, called them ineffective and discriminatory. There's more people coming out against this. So given all of this, there are potential leadership challenges. There are people at least who aspire to be leadership challenge on manoeuvres, almost certainly. Disappointingly, and despite the headline, the Telegraph doesn't list them, but I think we can probably find some on the fly. We can at least see who's most popular with the Tory rank and file. Conservative Home usually does good ones of these. I don't know that there's a particularly recent one, though. This is back in August. I don't know if there's a more recent one than that. Well, The Independent has happily done one of these for us, which means they're going to spam us with an advert, inevitably. Go away. Anyway, conversations about the Tory succession, The Independent reports, and who might lead the troops into the next battle are constant within the party. Apparently, they've been taking place long before recent scandals, which means they'll only be more fevered now. For the early part of the current Prime Minister's tenure, it was perceived wisdom in Westminster that Rishi Sunak would be the next to ascend the Tory throne. Assured performances by the Richmond and North Yorkshire MP while delivering his first budget was good. He's been generally popular. He's also been the one in charge of giving us all free money during furlough, so he was very popular since. He still is very popular, though he's starting to decline, not least because of the tax hikes. He is still the favourite for some bookies to be the next occupant, but The Independent asks who else. Well, Liz Truss, I believe, I didn't find it on the fly, but I think the most recent polling for Conservative Home suggests that Liz Truss is the current favourite. She has a really nice job as Foreign Secretary. Especially in this particular period. All she does these days is fly around the world and give press conferences announcing brand new trade deals. She also is quite likeable as a personality. She's quite cheerful, she's quite optimistic, she's quite bubbly. She's also reformed herself. She's become much more of a Thatcherite style free marketeer, which plays very well to a certain faction of the Conservative Party base. Also plays very well to me, and I'm not a Conservative. So she's been very popular, and her popularity's only been going up. Whether she's particularly competent, I don't know. She's never held significant briefs before the Foreign Office. She was at the Department for Agriculture once and gave a very famous speech about cheese and pork markets, and utterly failed to make that land at a Conservative Party conference. It was quite comical. So there's questions about her experience and her competence. She's not a huge amount is known about her. She's going to be up the top there, because of course if Boris Johnson goes, I believe it will, even in this situation, be Conservative Party members who elect the next Conservative Party leader, in which case Conservative Party members would elect the new Prime Minister, as they did with Boris Johnson, and Theresa May before him. Miss Truss's Twitter feed in 2016 was home to disparaging comments about the Leave campaign's economic arguments in the run to the referendum, The Independent reported. She was, of course, a Remain campaigner. She's since come out with a very different line. So again, there's always this question about people like Liz Truss, about whom very little is known. To what extent is their talk rhetoric, and to what extent is it believed? To what extent are they doing what they're told? So that's an issue with Liz Truss. She's also been attacking the woke, which is nice. Michael Gove, of course, usually only runs if he gets to stab one of his best mates in the back. So there is that. I don't know who he would attempt to stab in the back this time. He is viewed in Tory circles as competent and capable, The Independent reports. I think he's viewed generally as quite competent and quite capable. One of the reasons teachers don't like him very much is because he instituted wide-ranging reforms in education, but he got them through and he got them passed, which is why he's unpopular. He's unpopular with teachers' unions because he was successful. He also did very similar things to the Justice Department. He's a very effective minister, is why he has such a wide brief now. But again, questions about his moral probity, Also questions about his commitment to anything that's not himself, and questions about his popularity with the wider party after having stabbed Boris Johnson in the back the first time he ran. Can he be trusted? Well, can any of them? So Michael Gove is another one. Rishi Sunak is a 11-4 favourite according to Betfair, I think this is. Liz Truss is the second biggest mover in the market. She's at 33-1. She's now at 11-2. The odds of Mr. Johnson leaving his job, by contrast, by the end of the year, have shortened from 149-1 to as low as 15-1, which is that's pretty dramatic. The odds of him leaving number 10 in 2022 is proving a popular choice too. Betfair said the odds of him being slashed from 21 to 1 to 7-5. So here's the overall things. You'll have to look underneath the Independent's awful formatting. But Rishi Sunak is 13-5, Liz Truss 5-1, Michael Gove 15-2, Jeremy Hunt. Why would you want him? He looks like a startled child. His only success was staying for a very long time as the health secretary and doing not very much. Sajid Javid used to be nice, used to be quite good, used to be quite principled, used to be a libertarian, sort of right of the Conservative Party, read a lot of Ayn Rand, has a picture of Margaret Thatcher on his desk, moderated his position since then, probably as a preemptive leadership bid. Tom Tugendhat was very impressive over the Afghanistan thing, and he has a lot of foreign policy experience. I don't know that he has a huge amount of domestic policy experience. He took an incredibly firm and good moral stance, was a very effective speaker during the Afghanistan scuttle. So it's where the question with him is well, we don't know enough about him. I don't think the public knows enough about him. And does he have very much experience at high-level politics at doing anything else other than making good speeches, being morally right? But how can he handle the brief? Is he prepared for number 10? Does he even want to run? Ben Wallace is 23-1. And I don't know very much about Ben Wallace, and I tend to follow these things quite closely, so I don't suppose very many people, other people do either. So, yeah, that's the rundown of where we are at the moment. I hope Boris goes. The only problem is, again, there is no one better to replace him, which is not anything in favour of Boris. It's just a profound indictment of the system we're now in and the kind of dreck it produces. What has happened to British politics? How have we got such low-calibre people proliferating in Parliament? How can Boris be the best there is? How can Keir Starmer be the only alternative? This explains why we are fucked. And fucked we most definitely are.